So now that European nations have established kind of a foothold in the Western Hemisphere, they need to be able to not only finance further voyages, but they need to make the colonies self-sustaining. So that's where we take a look at the concept of colonial economics. Now, the notion of mercantilism developed prior to the understanding of the free market system, and it was part of the European concept that economics was a zero-sum game. And what that means is you benefit your own nation through trade, and if you benefit, your competition is suffering. Colonial trade was actually restricted to the markets of the mother country. So New England traders were banned from trading in the French West Indies because New England is controlled by the British. Now there's ways to avoid the policies. Like, for example, sugar and molasses from the British West Indies was supposed to go straight to England, but New England merchants would trade directly with the Caribbean, and they would trade timber and food for the sugar. They'd then refine the sugar into molasses or rum and trade directly for slaves in West Africa. And again, they found ways around the policies, but the commercial cities in British North America especially will deeply resent this policy of mercantilism. So that's one of the more broad economic systems in place. Now, establishing and running these enterprises was expensive and risky. A storm or pirates could steal or wipe out cargo, and merchants would go broke. The joint stock company allowed many people to purchase shares in one company, and they would expect to earn a more modest profit. This allowed the risk to be spread out more evenly. The Dutch were at the forefront of this innovation and allowed them to be one of the leaders of what would eventually become known as capitalism. Instead of seeking one large windfall, so like nations using mercantilism are expecting a windfall. They want a monopoly on trade. As opposed to that windfall, investors would achieve more regular gains by reinvesting their profits. And this will also set the stage for a new middle class that will base their social, economic, and political power on property ownership and growing their capital rather than inherited titles. The Dutch East India Company was the most famous example of a joint stock company. Now it's based out of Batavia in what became the nation of Indonesia. The government of the Netherlands granted a charter to this company and gave it a monopoly on Dutch trade with Asia. Rival European powers are going to seek to copy the success of the Netherlands, so the Dutch really will be on the forefront of economic change. Now, somewhat in establishing these colonies, but also going along with running them, we have to acknowledge the importance of silver. And the silver trade is said to have ushered in the first era of globalization, because silver is really the first universal currency. Silver was readily available due to the discovery of the rich deposits of silver in the Western Hemisphere, which Spanish America provided 85% of the world's supply, and simultaneously there was the discovery of deposits of silver in Japan. Manila, which was the colonial capital of the Philippines and controlled by the Spanish, was the final destination for Spanish silver mined in the Western Hemisphere, mainly in Bolivia. So Manila became the global center of a trade that would connect the Americas and Asia. Now, the Chinese demand for silver helped intensify the trade, especially in the 1570s, when the Ming Dynasty decreed that all taxes were to be paid in silver. The value of the metal increased, and foreigners with silver now had more access to the silk and porcelains that were coveted in Europe. A standard Spanish silver coin was called the Piece of Eight, and it was accepted globally. North America would accept it, and Europe, India, Russia, West Africa. However far it circulated, ultimately, most of it does end back up in China due to these laws that the Ming Dynasty had passed. So we're really looking at the first global currency, the era of globalization. Now, Potosi in modern-day Bolivia, you can see in one of the depictions here, it's dramatically transformed by the silver trade. So it's an example of how the economy of a region has an overall effect on society and culture. Potosi is on a remote mountain, and from the capital of the Viceroyalty of Peru, which was Lima, it'll take you 10 weeks to get there on a mule. Spanish prospectors discovered a rich deposit of the metal in 1545. Within a few decades, Potosi had a population that was the equivalent of London, equivalent of Amsterdam, and Seville, with about 160,000. And this increase is going to come at a massive cost. Native Americans are forced into the mines to work them, and one Spanish priest claimed that if 20 healthy natives went down into the mines on a Monday, half may emerge crippled by Saturday. This is brutal work. African slaves would extract the silver from the ore above ground, and this process required mixing it with mercury. So thousands are putting their lives in jeopardy for this. Funerals were often held for men who were drafted into working the mines before they went to Potosi. Now, mining operations led to increased European wealth, but there were some small business opportunities that existed for the locals. But Potosi is a classic boom-bust tale. By 1800, most of the mines had shut down, and the city was a shell of what it once was. When you look at areas that have lodes, or they have rich deposits of a certain ore, often, as long as the ore is booming, times are good. When it goes bust, that's that. Now, the increased supply of silver is going to inflate prices, and the Spanish really didn't take advantage of the market benefits of their newly found bonanza. Now, Japan will benefit from their silver deposits because the Tokugawa shoguns will use the profits to defeat their enemies. They're going to unify the country, and they'll ally themselves with domestic merchants to stimulate the economy. Japan, at this same time that they're extracting silver, is also going to act to try and save their forests, which have kind of been decimated at this point. And families will also begin to have fewer children, kind of like in modern-day Western society as a whole. Now, China's economy becomes more regionalized as a result of the widespread silver trade, and Europeans are simply going to serve as middlemen in this process. So silver leads to the first global currency. Now, in looking at Potosi, we get a little bit into colonial labor, but until the 1540s, local natives were divided amongst the settlers. So we're looking at Spanish settlers. Local natives are divided amongst the settlers, and they are forced to provide them with labor, textiles, or food in exchange for learning Christianity, and the Spaniards would, take care of them, so to speak. Mistreatment and disease, as well as the passage of what became the new laws, will weaken this encomienda system. Encomienda translates to entrusted, where the settlers are entrusted to take care of the natives and teach them Christianity. This was actually utilized when the Spanish monarchs administered lands that were retaken under the Reconquista, so it simply was transferred across the ocean to the Western Hemisphere. And in Mexico, free wage laborers were relied on. And this kind of explains why it was Mexican miners who revolutionized the process of extracting silver using mercury. So encomienda, entrusted, we're talking forced labor. The mita system is revived, and this becomes especially apparent in Peru. The mita was an Inca system, and under the Inca, 1/7 of all adult males had to, they had to provide labor. Under the Spanish, these adult males have to work 2 to 4 months each year, either in farms, textile factories, or the mines. Now, as we've seen with Potosi, the mines are the worst because men have to carry sacks of ore up unstable wooden ladders. Under the Inca, this is a reciprocal system where the laborers are taken care of by the state, and they help out the elderly and those who can't work. Under the Spanish, few could survive on the wages they received, so women and children are forced into service. Declining population actually led to a shortening of time in between months of service, from once every 7 years to 1 to 2 years. Many natives are so unhappy with this system, as well as the additional taxes that are imposed on traditional native villages, that they permanently moved to the cities, and they became full-time wage laborers, and many will become assimilated into the new Spanish-speaking Catholic society. So in more central South America, we see the Mita, we see the encomienda. More in North America, we look at the concept of indentured servitude. And with indentured servitude, if you can't afford passage to the Western Hemisphere or North America, your passage is paid for, either by somebody else or for the company. You have to work off the debt. Usually it's 4 to 7 years, but generally speaking, they'll get a full 7 years out of you. At the completion of your service, you receive land. That's the big incentive here. You work off your debt, you receive land, which is something you can't get back in Europe. And eventually this system will give way to what we call chattel slavery. And this is something we'll get into when we see effects of the transatlantic slave trade.